Welcome to Cloud on Air, live webinars from Google Cloud. We are hosting webinars daily. You are watching From Engineer to Engineer, a show where you can hear from Google Cloud customer engineers about how to solve complex problems on GCP based on real stories from the customers. My name is Jonathan Sham, and today we'll be talking about Migrate for Anthos. Joining me today is Lucian. How are you?
Good. How are you, Jonathan?
Fantastic. So you can ask questions anytime on the platform, and we have Googlers on standby to answer them. Let's get started. Migrate for Anthos, one of my favorite topics, just because what I do on a day-to-day basis is talk to customers, especially enterprise customers. And the one thing that enterprise customers want to do is, look, they're looking for agility, flexibility, scalability. They want to move quick. And they're looking to Google to say, hey, help me move quicker, help me to modernize. And we've made all these announcements around Anthos. One of the pieces of that is Migrate for Anthos. And I know a little bit about what you do. You do a little bit of Migrate for Anthos. You're the expert. So, tell me what you do, what you're working on, and what Migrate for Anthos is.
Absolutely. So in our group, what we focus on is bringing customer workloads to the cloud and to hybrid cloud. So, Anthos and Anthos Migrate is in the heart of what we're doing.
Great.
And we've been in this migration journey for a long time. And today, we know how to migrate at scale thousands and thousands of VMs, customer workloads to the cloud. So our new journey, what now we're doing in beta, is how do we not only move applications to the cloud, but how do we modernize them? How do we run that, instead of running that as a VM that lands on GCP or on your hybrid Anthos environment, how do we actually run it in a container and run it on GKE? And that way, it can start interacting with new app development that's already containerized and modern, microservice tiers, or also, coexist with new environment and legacy environments. So we're really into helping our customers to move to cloud and modernize them in the same time. So that's our new product, and that's what we've been working hard to bring to market.
That's great. Yeah, I have enterprises that are 90,000, 100,000s of VMs, and they're looking to just move it to the cloud as a VM, but also as containers. So I'd love to hear what we have Migrate for Anthos. So what is this at a high level?
Sure. At a high level, what we do is, and the way to look at this is from a journey perspective, from the bottom to the up of the diagram, we take a customer environment, whether it's on-premise, for example, VMware ESX, or on a public cloud, and then we take a workload that's running there and we move it to GCP. And when we do that, we actually can land it in a VM, as I said, or in a container. And once it lands in a container and runs as, in that environment in GKE, you can start interacting with Istio, you can start interacting with all the other embedded GCP tools that we leverage for our GKE customers. So we really have this ability to migrate, and our software allows both VM migration and GKE migration.
That's great. It sounds kind of too good to be true. I'd love to see a demo, but how do you decide between whether an enterprise should move from a VM just to VM, or from a VM to container, or maybe it depends? What is your opinion on that?
I'm glad you asked. I would say there's two major use cases. For enterprises that are very Windows focused, the good path today to migrate is to migrate as a VM. When enterprises are more Kubernetes alike already with Linux operating systems, we run GKE with Linux workloads. So that would be the key differentiator initially for the decision. Are you running Windows or Linux? And therefore you pick one of these two journeys for now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of, depending on the skill set of the people as well, right? If they know Linux really well, if they maybe know Kubernetes, then going straight to containers is probably the right approach. All right, so I'd love to see the demo. I think, I'm all about getting to the punchline. So do you have a demo ready? Or I think we're going to talk about the environment first, right?
I'd love to start this with showing a demo, and we'll do a setup just to go through the demo environment.
Perfect.
And we'll go and get right into the weeds.
All right.
So here's our initial state. What we have is a VM, a virtual machine, that's running, and it's running on premise at the bottom, if you will, of this diagram. And there is an application VM and a database VM. So what we're migrating here, what we want to migrate is a two-tier application. Okay. So it's an application and a database. So web server and database, that will be our app. In our use case, we'll do a CRM application. So an application that's tracking customers and accounts with a database and a web server.
Got
Okay,
it. So
that's our
you've already
starting
set up-
environment.
Okay, so the customer's already set up the VPN between the cloud. They have a project
Yes.
set up in Google Cloud.
Exactly.
Do you have to have a VM set up in compute already, or is that part of the whole process?
You don't have to.
Okay.
We install one for our migration software.
Okay.
And we'll cover that a little bit later on, but
Perfect.
you don't have to do that. What initially you need to have in any case is a connection to GCP
Okay.
and a GCP project.
Okay.
And then you install our Anthos Migrate software.
Okay. What about
Yep.
the GKE environment? Does that need to be set up already?
We should have in the GCP project a GK cluster created.
Okay, so that needs to be set
And
up.
if not, through our application deployment in Marketplace, it's very easy actually. Today you install our application through Marketplace, and you just can create a new cluster for GKE right there if
Okay.
it doesn't exist.
Cool.
So either a customer already has GKE and a GKE cluster, or we'll create a new one for them.
Very good.
Okay. So as you saw, we started on premise, and our end result once we do Anthos Migrate is you still have your application in database constructs, and they run as pods, two different GKE pods, and we have a container for each, and that's a one-on-one type of modernization. We can get more elaborated in terms of the architecture and the end result. But here, for sake of the demo, we start with a two-tier application, and we go all the way in the journey to a two-tier Kubernetes environment.
Very good.
Okay. And once you're there, one of the key benefits is once you've landed and you're running on GKE, then customers can leverage Stackdriver, they can leverage Istio, all these tools that are integrated with GKE. Well, their app, once it migrates to GKE, all the framework around it can be leveraged.
Yeah.
And that's really a very, very seamless integration without having to go into the application of customers, changing ports, custom configurations in order to get telemetry, visibility, security, and so forth.
Just by moving into the cloud, we already inherit some of the benefits of cloud, like monitoring, logging, security, all of that.
Absolutely.
So I also noticed that, now that even though you're changing or moving your traditional app from on-prem to the cloud, now that you've containerized it and created pods, and once you've created pods, technically you could scale out that app service to multiple pods.
Absolutely.
And just immediately, the fact that you put it in GKE, you can do auto scaling, and you've created a more scalable app service just
Environment.
by doing that.
You're correct, and we'll go a little bit more in detail after the demo if you like.
Yeah.
We'll cover more these aspects of what are the added values once you're on GKE. So we'll talk about what type of scaling we can do and what type of applications actually are possible to migrate.
Okay, great.
So without further ado, how about now showing you this live onto a demo? What we have is an ESX, VMware ESX environment with our two virtual machines. It's a suite CRM. So one VM is a database and another VM is the application. The database is on CentOS and the application is running on SUSE. The reason is we want to show that we can actually move various operating systems in it and in that process of migrating. Then, what I want to show you before migrating is that the application functions initially on-premise. And so it's two VMs and two OSs, as I said, and I can log in on the IP address that was in VMware on the app. And what I was able to see is basically that I have basically the accounts, the users, and the app is up and running currently on-premise at this time. Then I have created a GK cluster here for the demo purpose. I already created it. I called it demo. And it's running a certain version of Kubernetes, and that's all to it. Now, how do I start my migration is really the next point. And we'll start the migration from actually a YAML file, and the user will go and tell Kubernetes that they want to migrate. And that's the journey we want them. When we want customers to migrate to Kubernetes, we want them to interface with GKE. And our software has, is integrated with GKE, and therefore, when GKE will say, hey, let's migrate these VMs, then it's orchestrating it and the migration happens. And so the way we migrate is really by running a YAML file. And in the YAML file, we'll specify what the VM is, what's the VM ID. We'll say what type of migration we want to do. For example, here we'll do streaming, and we can talk about the benefits of that later on. And we define our application construct, what container image to use, and how do we create the services. And so we apply that YAML file. And when we do, that automatically triggers the creation of services in our project. So you see that now we have an application in a database workload that's been created. This is in workloads, and we'll talk about services just right after that. And so these are the two pods, application and database, that are created. And here are the services. We decide to expose only the application, for example, HTTPS, just because we don't need to expose, for example, the database externally, right? So one example here is the end user will just go and connect to the load balancer IP address, and then this is how they'll interact with the application that's migrated into the GKE cluster. And so you see we pick the IP address of the load balancer, we log in, and we have the exact same experience.
Nice. So the YAML file is fed directly into the Migrate for Anthos tool, though?
Absolutely,
okay.
It does. And one key proposition value or benefit from our technology is that this takes about 5 minutes, to do the migration and be able to log in on something that's running on the cloud. We migrate the storage in the background, and we'll talk about it, later on. But it's very quick to know. You know your result, if it's success or failure. And as we migrate to Kubernetes, we always offer also the rollback option, right? If something goes wrong, the customer can go back. They can also do some testing before migrating production workloads. So we have a variety of ways to do migration.
Great.
And now that we're there, I talked about Istio. I'm going in my cluster and I enable Istio as an add-on. And once it's enabled, every time I log in the application, I create HTTP traffic. And what I can see now is that traffic and those metrics right away on my cluster.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, for those of you who don't know Istio, I mean, it's like an open source platform, creates a service mesh, allows you to get more insight into the network traffic and the endpoints within and across in between Kubernetes clusters.
That's right.
That's great. Yeah, that's exciting. So yeah, I'd love to dig into the details. The devil's always in the details. You mentioned about, how do we do the storage? I'd love to also talk about, should we have a maintenance window for something like this, right? Should we say, hey, okay, no writes during this time, reads only? Maybe you can talk a little bit about what's the best migration path for something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into that in the next couple of slides and talk about it. At first, what we want customers to understand is the flow. And what is the added value of Migrate for Anthos? And here, when you look at this slide, the left side is your initial starting point. You're running on a VM. You have an application, services, you have login, OS kernel drivers, virtual disk, and so forth. And this is your initial environment that you're starting your migration from. And then you end up on the right column, which is basically running that application and services that you see in green in a GKE environment. What I try to highlight here in yellow are all the benefits from your application and services get because they're running on GKE. And so, the storage, we're not going to have virtual hardware anymore. We're going to have persistent volume. Networking, we will use GCP networking. We can also leverage Istio for load balancer and whatnot if a customer has a preference. Logging will be in our GCP logging and stack driver. And Kubernetes will be managing the kernel and the drivers.
So for something
anytime,
go ahead.
Anytime, for example, you need to upgrade for security reasons and patch your kernel, well, because you're running on GKE, we can take care of that for you without you having to worry. So when you see a security bulletin about upgrading an OS, well, most likely we've upgraded it already for you, and your environment is safe.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of managed services, right?
Yes,
We just
exactly.
manage all of that for you. So I did have a question about the persistent volumes. Do we automate the creation of persistent volumes during this process, and we just dump all the data in there? Is that what we do?
We do.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
And in the way we define the YAML files, you will decide what storage class you'd like to use, what persistent volume you'd like to use, and then it's part of the architecture of how you build your app once it gets modernized, how you want to land on GKE. So for example, you could have a persistent volume for one or two different kind of apps, or you can separate them. It's really up to the end user. And of course, we have best practices and recommendations, but we're flexible, and it's really driven by the policy model in the YAML file.
Okay. And then as you migrate from VM to container, a lot of on-prem enterprises are already using some logging solution, right? If they want to leverage the cloud logging, like Stackdriver,
Yes.
There's probably some tuning involved, right? Like, because then you don't need that agent in there anymore. So is it like, should they remove it prior to the migration, or is it after it's containerized, removing those agents? Like, what's the best practice?
I'm glad you asked. The way we worked on this with using a container for the migration and run this as a monolithic application running on GKE, we actually did already a lot of automation in the container image that the customers will be using. And so we actually output, based on all the applications that we support, we already integrate that automatically with GCP. So a customer wouldn't have really to worry per se in doing anything to get logging. It's a benefit that they get because they moved, and the outputs are naturally driven out from the container to the logging infrastructure of GCP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Let's go and talk maybe a little bit more about the user journey here and how that migration process works. And it's very similar to the video to the demo that we watched. We start with a user that's running a YAML, and it's at the lower left-hand side of this slide, and we push a YAML file to Kubernetes. So GKE then starts the migration journey. What do we have initially before we migrate? We have, in our data center environment, we have VMs. Here they're in blue, 2 VMs, and we may have physical machines as well, and so forth, obviously, for the VMs to run on. We install a migration appliance. So we have an OVA file for our software that's, by the way, just available for downloads on cloud.google.com. So a customer downloads our free software and installs an OVA file here, deploys the migration appliance, and we have these 2 VMs here. And so GKE will basically talk to our migration appliance, and that will trigger the movement of the VMs, the workloads. And what you have as an end result is that you have containers created in GKE. We create a cache disk, and we actually start migrating the storage to a cache. And as the user uses the app already, the cache continues to grow, and the storage moves in the background. The main benefit from that streaming technology that we have is that a user, literally for Linux, can be up and running in about 5 minutes. It takes about 9 minutes for a Windows workload to move. But it's really to give this benefit for users to have a fast time of migration.
And you can still use the app, though, while
Absolutely.
Okay, and it's going to just get the latest and greatest. Is there like a time where, how do you make sure that what you have on the cloud is in sync with what's on-prem?
We actually use streaming. So see our technology, think about our technology as a Netflix or a YouTube type of experience for storage. So an end user starts to use their application on GKE, and the storage is being streamed in the background. So it's played remotely.
Okay.
And it's cached locally on GCP. And as the user uses it, it continues to get cached. And when everything has been transferred, then you can detach or end your migration and be done with it. But it's just a streaming technology that allows that.
Okay, good.
And here is actually that story about it. We, with our stream compute technology that we have, we actually start moving into a cache on GCP the information, and we migrate in the background to that cache. So there is no, with our technology, there is no need per se to have, first of all, we don't need to install agents on the VMs or synchronize states. We don't need to keep storage on two different places. We just naturally first stream the storage over while it's still the source is the data center. And once the user decides that this works properly for him and they want to make the switch over, then once all the data is copied, we can disconnect and then they can use the cloud. And if they want to roll back, we have the similar mechanism to bring it back. It's often something that people don't talk about. They often talk about how do we migrate someone to the cloud? But with our technology, we help you migrate to the cloud, but if at any given time you want to also migrate back, we do the same thing. A use case for a customer would be, well, we have some certain ways to update our monolithic application on premise, and we have certain tools in place, so we'd like to move it back, do some patching or updates locally, and then move it back. Or, there's certain use cases where it could be interesting to be able to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I have customers that ask about the hybrid cloud. So how does this relate to hybrid cloud, right? Because right now we're talking about moving from on-prem to cloud, but what about having in both environments?
Sure. What we want to allow to our customers is the migration journey, whether they want to migrate certain applications and keep other ones on premise, that's fine. We're just really in this technology of doing as fast as possible migration and bi-directional type of process. It really here depends on the customer use case, where they want to go, and how can we embrace them in their journey and help them out. Whether they have Windows workloads, Linux workloads, whether they have this hybrid cloud strategy where they want to have certain workloads to stay on premise and other ones to move. And sometimes what we see in the journey too is things will change in even the process of migration. At first it could be certain apps that were designed to move, and then that would change for something else by the time we're at migrating. So, we're really here bringing a piece of software, of technology, to allow a modernization and migration of applications and let customers decide what they want to do. So what I find useful in the journey is to always have a conversation about architecture, use cases, so we can try to help and map them to how can they really do it.
Great.
You talked about earlier, you asked me about what is the best practice to move to migrate, and how do we recommend migration to happen? Typically the migration journey starts with understanding, doing a discovery and understanding what runs on the customer environment. What are different applications? What are the versions? How large are the disks, the operating systems? What do we want to move? And so once that discovery journey is done, typically the tools that generate discovery will create output files for migration, or they will plug into our API framework for our migration software, and then we can directly receive that feed of information of what application will be migrated.
Okay.
We can generate YAML files, and then the customer will just run that and migrate those files over.
Okay, cool.
Typically I would say when it's production environments, what we have been seeing is, it would be over weekends, maintenance windows, and things of that nature.
Okay.
With our product, we do see a factor of 5x in terms of faster time of the overall migration journey compared to any other type of solution out there. That's just because of how we do streaming and how we interact on the hypervisor level with the VMs to migrate, and we don't need customers to install any agent on their VMs. So we see that, and so that's for production. But before customers move production, they also can test the migration. So we have this capability of making a copy or a clone of the VM and moving it over, creating a copy. So they can see, offline if this migration will be successful.
That's actually really
in a canary,
useful.
Canary environment. And then, we have the streaming technology that I talked about for moving. And so we have testing, streaming, and we can move back and forth.
That's great. Yep.
And, one key benefit, as I said earlier, is once you land on GKE, well, then you can look at your application on the GKE dashboard. So you can see how much compute is being used, what APIs are pulling and how much, what's the CPU, the memory, and also the logs. So all the logs for customers that were, the custom logs that were coming out, just as an STD out on a Linux output on a VM, well, this is automatically, we did work to integrate this with our stack driver and our logging for GCP. So all these messages come out directly on the console and the UI. And so a customer can actually use modern tools to parse these logs to know what happened to their container.
That's great. So I know that a lot of customers want the magic, the magic wand, moving it directly to container, hope that everything's modernized. But unfortunately, there's a lot of baggage in these traditional VMs, right? There's probably got updates, patches, agents, plugins, all that. And the tool doesn't know any better. It's going to copy all of those and move it into the container. This might be a question you don't know how to answer, but what is there a best practice there? Once it's moved into a container, it's still got all this stuff. Like, what's the cleanup process like? Because ideally, moving into container is that first step to modernizing.
Yes. I'm glad you asked this, because what we've been trying to focus so far is how do we move these VMs and how do we make them in containers? What we are thinking now is how do we break down monolithic applications and go more towards a microservice approach and do this cleanup.
Right.
So I would say today from our embedded software, we don't have a solution that's automated at this point, but it's something that we're working on. But the problematic of what you would have to clean up would be today fairly up to the customer and the environment. So we would, with our services teams, we would work with them to identify these things and clean them up. We can also, through scripting and API frameworks, constructs, kind of automate these things for them to be done automatically. But it's not something that today we do as part of the migration software per se.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think it would be very difficult. like nobody would know what's in this app that's critical versus not critical. So,
oftentimes, for many customers, it's the first goal is they want to keep the lights on. So they want to migrate an app that's, see it as a black box. It's been running into their physical data center for years.
And it's worked well.
It's working. They don't know anymore how to
touch it, right?
They don't, exactly. It's this thing of, oh, we don't know who did this, but we're not touching it. We need it.
Yeah.
So can you just move it as is?
Exactly.
And that we know how to do. And this allows customers to move to the cloud, keeping the lights on. We even had customers that wanted us to support really, really old operating systems for that reason. Just because they want to keep the lights on, and that we know how to do with Anthos Migrate.
Great.
And then comes the modernization aspect, which we're thinking now in terms of a next step for our journey of modernizing the monolithic applications.
That's great.
Yep.
All right.
Maybe we should talk about, I think it's something that we wanted to talk about. What do we support, right?
Yeah.
What can you migrate?
Yeah, actually before this, I told them, I said, hey, look, I'm the moderator here. I got to look from the customer standpoint. This tool sounds too good, right? So what are things that, what can you migrate? What are not good, workloads to migrate? And I think we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, what we try to build is something that answers, I would say, 99% of the initial asks and our customer use cases of where we are in aligning that to the GKE journey. Okay, so today what we can migrate is applications that are built on enterprise Linux environments. Okay, so I'll step right away into something that we don't support today. It's, for example, Windows. So if you are running Windows and that's say 95% of your enterprise environment and you want to move those workloads. Today, we can move those at scale with thousands of VMs, but we will move it as an on-par VM to VM migration. Okay? The modernization aspect of moving to containers for Windows, this is coming, it's a work in progress for us. It's something that we are developing currently and that we will be offering, once we get Windows for containers.
Great.
But I would say that's something that today, if a customer says, I want to modernize, I want to move this Windows virtual machine and running in GKE, Well, today GKE doesn't have that.
Yep.
So as that comes to maturity, we will be offering the migration. So I would say that's one big aspect of it. And the other one is more about high performance things. So let's take big data in Hadoop. Hadoop environments typically that require high memory databases, high performance, low latency, and so forth. Although we have low latency TPU, GPU type of clusters in GCP, these are things that are a lot heavier to migrate. So I would say currently, because we're in beta, it's not something that's an ideal workload type of environment to have. Same goes for customers that have modified their kernels for their VMs or have certain things that are running 32 bits that they want to move over. Currently in beta, it's not something that we support. That's why I wanted to call it out.
Yeah.
But now maybe we can focus a little bit on what are the best use cases.
Yep.
And that's typically going to be similar to the demo. Web server, Tomcats of the like, and then we're going to go into middleware. So WebSphere, WebLogic, and then databases, SAP, Hybris, and SQL and other type of databases, without forgetting Java, JBoss, and all these other type of environments. So all these monolithic type of Linux type of applications are a great fit for this tool.
That's great.
Oftentimes this question comes in terms of, well, where can I find more information, right? We are now with this product in beta, and therefore we have really published everything that we have in terms of user guides, tutorials, and so forth on our website. Same goes with our software. Our software is free, and a customer can download it.
Okay, so the
our
tool
beta
is free.
Yes.
But using, obviously, the GKE components is
Right.
pay for what you use.
That's part of your GCP project and
Right.
account. But the migration tool, is available online, and our beta has been published. So I would say that's the best place for resources.
Got it.
We also have, you mentioned, when we started to talk today, you mentioned Google Next. So we had 2 talks at Google Next that were recorded, and the slides are published. So anyone that looks for Anthos Migrate and looks it up online, they will find our Google Next conversations with architecture, deep dive, and customer use cases.
That's great. And then just one real quick. I know there's Velostrata, there's
Yes.
Migrate for Anthos.
Yes.
Like, just quickly talk about what is the difference, what is the same, like what are those two?
Sure. So Velostrata is our team and our product initially. This was a Google acquisition from from over a year ago.
Yeah.
And what Velostrata was doing was this production massive migration for VMs. So how do we migrate a VM to a VM? Whether it's Windows, Linux, and how do we do that at scale? And a lot of the things that we have, such as streaming and all these technology, this is Velostrata. I would say Anthos Migrate is a subset or part of our Velostrata group.
I see.
It's kind of the next level in our journey. It's the evolution of the Velostrata software. It's to say now we will offer, in addition, migration to Kubernetes. And the reason we decided to call this now, Migrate for Anthos, is because this falls into our Anthos strategy, hybrid cloud, and modernization. And, Velostrata is a Google product and a Google team. And so therefore now what you see is this evolution of our software and journey and kind of that name around our product. So one thing key to remember is Migrate for Anthos allows the migration from a VM to a container on GKE. We also have Migrate for Compute, which is the Velostrata VM to VM migration. And these 2 products are part of our migration. This is our migration story to GCP.
Great. So love the resources. Right before we did this session, I was on YouTube looking up a lot of the content, lots of content here. So, maybe it's a good chance for you to wrap up and help us understand, what did we learn today?
I would say our key takeaways, at first I want everyone to understand that we have a software that enables customer to migrate to GCP. And whether it's a virtual machine to a virtual machine type of migration, or whether it's modernization of workloads and moving that to a GKE environment, we have solutions that today customers deploy and run at scale with thousands and thousands of VMs. And both of our softwares are available, and the Migrate for Anthos is today available in beta and will be GA soon.
That's fantastic. So definitely go out, try it, go download it, look at the docs. I'm all about feedback, so go ahead and let us know if it's working. If it's not working, we want to make our platforms better. And definitely ask questions. We have Googlers, on standby, looking at the questions. So ask us as many questions as possible. And thank you again for tuning in. Please visit Cloud on Air for more content from Google Cloud experts.